The moon hangs in our night sky, a familiar presence that has captivated human imagination for millennia. When we look up and see its silvery surface, it appears close, almost touchable, a neighbor in the cosmic expanse. This proximity is an illusion, one that has shaped our collective dreams of lunar colonization and has led to a fundamental misunderstanding about what it would truly mean to send humans to live there permanently. The reality is far more sobering than popular culture would have us believe. The first humans to establish a permanent presence on the moon will face a constellation of challenges so severe, so interconnected, and so unforgiving that their journey will effectively be one way. This is not a matter of pessimism or technological limitation in the abstract sense. It is a matter of physics, biology, engineering, and the brutal arithmetic of orbital mechanics. To understand why the pioneers of lunar settlement will never come home, we must first dispel the illusion that has made the moon seem like a reasonable destination for human habitation. When we say the moon is close, we are speaking relatively. At its nearest approach, the moon sits approximately 363,000 kilometers from Earth. At its farthest, this distance extends to just over 400,000 kilometers. These numbers sound manageable in the context of cosmic distances. After all, the nearest star system beyond our own is over 40 trillion kilometers away. By that measure, the moon is practically in our backyard. But this comparison obscures the staggering difficulty of the journey. 360,000 kilometers is roughly 10 times the circumference of Earth. It represents a gulf that can only be crossed with chemical rockets that must carry not only their payload, but also all the fuel needed for the entire journey. The Apollo missions, humanity's only successful manned lunar expeditions, required the most powerful rocket ever built, the Saturn V, which stood 110 meters tall and weighed over 2,800 metric tons at launch. Of that enormous mass, only a tiny capsule weighing less than 6,000 kilograms made it back to Earth with 3 astronauts inside. This ratio is not a quirk of 1960s technology. It is a fundamental constraint imposed by the physics of rocketry, specifically the tyranny of the rocket equation. The rocket equation, formulated by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in the late 19th century, describes the relationship between rocket velocity, exhaust velocity, and the ratio of a rocket's initial mass to its final mass. In practical terms, it tells us that to go faster or farther, we need exponentially more fuel. This exponential relationship creates a vicious cycle. The fuel itself has mass, which means we need more fuel to carry that fuel, which adds more mass, requiring yet more fuel, and so on. The result is that the vast majority of any rocket's mass at launch is fuel, not payload. For a mission to the moon and back, this ratio becomes almost absurd. The Saturn V was essentially a skyscraper-sized fuel tank with a small capsule perched on top. Modern rockets have not fundamentally changed this equation. They have become more efficient, more reliable, and more reusable in some cases, but they still cannot escape the basic physics. A permanent lunar base would require not just one mission, but hundreds, perhaps thousands, of supply runs over years or decades. Each of those missions would require massive rockets, each carrying mostly fuel, each representing an enormous expenditure of energy and resources. Architected expansive documentary structure and calculated pacing requirements. Good start. I'm establishing the illusion of proximity and introducing the rocket equation. Now I need to transition into the atmosphere section while maintaining flow. The script needs to be around 9,000 to 10,000 words for 60 minutes, so I need to expand significantly on each topic. The moon's apparent closeness also deceives us in another way. We can see it clearly with the naked eye. We can observe its features, its craters, and Maria from our backyards with nothing more than a pair of binoculars. This visibility creates a psychological sense of accessibility. If we can see it so clearly, surely we can reach it, live on it, return from it. But the moon we see from Earth is fundamentally different from the moon as experienced on its surface. The image we perceive is filtered through Earth's atmosphere, softened by distance, made romantic by context. The reality on the lunar surface is harsh beyond measure, and much of that harshness stems from a single critical absence. The moon has no atmosphere. This fact is so fundamental that it shapes every other challenge of lunar habitation. On Earth, we take our atmosphere for granted. It is invisible, weightless from our perspective, ever present. We breathe it without thought, walk through it without resistance, live beneath its protective blanket without appreciating the countless ways it sustains us. The atmosphere provides us with oxygen, obviously, but that is perhaps its least important function from an engineering standpoint. Oxygen can be produced, recycled, stored. The atmosphere's other functions are far more difficult to replicate artificially. Earth's atmosphere moderates temperature. During the day, it scatters and absorbs some of the sun's radiation, preventing the surface from becoming unbearably hot. At night, it acts as an insulating blanket, trapping heat and preventing temperatures from plummeting. On the moon, there is no such moderation. During the lunar day, which lasts approximately 14 Earth days, surface temperatures can reach 127 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight. During the lunar night, equally long, temperatures plunge to minus 173 degrees Celsius. This is not a gradual transition. There is no twilight, no dawn in the sense that we understand it. The terminator, the line between lunar day and night, is sharp and unforgiving. Step from shadow into sunlight, and the temperature differential can exceed 200 degrees Celsius. This thermal environment creates immediate engineering challenges. Any structure on the moon must be able to withstand these extremes without buckling, cracking, or failing. Seals must remain intact. Joints must not freeze or warp. Every material has a thermal expansion coefficient, a measure of how much it expands or contracts with temperature changes. Over a 280-degree temperature range, these expansions and contractions are significant. Metals expand, polymers become brittle, lubricants freeze or boil away. Maintaining a habitable interior temperature requires constant energy input, massive insulation, and redundant heating and cooling systems. On Earth, if a building's heating system fails in winter, the temperature drops slowly. There is time to notice the problem, time to fix it, time to evacuate if necessary. On the moon, a heating system failure during lunar night means the interior temperature would begin dropping rapidly toward the outside temperature. Without immediate intervention, equipment would fail, water would freeze and burst pipes, and any inhabitants would face hypothermia within hours. But temperature is only the beginning of the atmospheric challenge. Earth's atmosphere also provides pressure. At sea level, atmospheric pressure is approximately 101 kilopascals, or about 14.7 pounds per square inch. This pressure is not something we notice, but it is constantly present, pushing on every surface of our bodies from all directions. Our bodies have evolved under this pressure. Our blood, our tissues, our very cells expect it. Remove that pressure, expose a human to the vacuum of space or the near vacuum of the lunar surface, and the results are catastrophic. The human body does not explode, as sometimes depicted in science fiction, but the effects are immediate and fatal. Gases dissolved in bodily fluids begin to form bubbles, a condition known as ebulism. Saliva, tears, and the moisture on the tongue and in the respiratory tract begin to boil, not because of heat, but because of the lack of pressure. At low enough pressures, water boils at room temperature. The lungs would be damaged within seconds as air expands violently. Consciousness would be lost in approximately 15 seconds due to oxygen deprivation. Death would follow within 1 to 2 minutes. A pressure suit prevents these effects, but it introduces its own set of challenges. A pressure suit is not clothing. It is a personal spacecraft, a one-person atmosphere. It must maintain pressure, provide oxygen, remove carbon dioxide, regulate temperature, provide communication, allow mobility, and do all of this without failure for the duration of any extravehicular activity. The Apollo spacesuits were engineering marvels, handcrafted suits that took months to produce and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, each in 1960s currency. Modern spacesuits are even more complex. The extravehicular mobility units used on the International Space Station weigh approximately 120 kilograms each and cost upwards of $12 million. They require extensive maintenance, have limited operational lifetimes, and are bulky enough that they significantly restrict movement. Living on the Moon would require regular extravehicular activity. Equipment would need to be maintained, experiments conducted, structures built or repaired. Every time someone stepped outside, they would be betting their life on the integrity of their pressure suit. A tear, a seal failure, a malfunctioning valve, any of these could be fatal within seconds. There would be no margin for error. Sequenced atmospheric challenges into radiation section while maintaining scientific rigor. Good progression into atmospheric challenges. Now I need to move into radiation, which connects well with the lack of atmosphere. The absence of an atmosphere creates another, even more insidious problem. It removes one of Earth's primary shields against radiation from space. Every moment of every day, Earth is bombarded by radiation from multiple sources. The Sun constantly emits a stream of charged particles, protons and electrons that flow outward through the solar system. This is the solar wind, and while it is relatively benign under normal circumstances, the Sun occasionally releases much more energetic bursts during solar flares and coronal mass ejections. Beyond our solar system, cosmic rays, high-energy particles, accelerated by distant supernovae and other energetic events, stream through the galaxy, constantly. These particles carry enormous amounts of energy. When they strike atoms, they can tear electrons away, break molecular bonds, and damage the delicate structures of living cells. On Earth, we are protected from this radiation by two overlapping shields. The first is our atmosphere, which absorbs or scatters most incoming radiation before it reaches the surface. The second is Earth's magnetic field, generated by the motion of molten iron in our planet's core. This magnetic field extends far into space, creating a protective bubble called the magnetosphere that deflects charged particles away from Earth. The Moon has neither of these protections. It has no atmosphere to speak of and no meaningful magnetic field. The Moon does have localized magnetic anomalies in some regions, but these are far too weak to provide any significant protection. On the lunar surface, radiation from space arrives unimpeded. An astronaut standing on the Moon during a major solar flare could receive a lethal radiation dose in hours. Even without such dramatic events, the constant background radiation on the Moon is approximately 250 millisieverts per year, compared to about 3 millisieverts per year at sea level on Earth. This is not immediately fatal, but it is far above safe exposure limits. The International Commission on Radiological Protection recommends that occupational radiation exposure not exceed 50 millisieverts per year for any single year, and no more than 100 millisieverts over 5 years. A person living on the lunar surface would exceed these limits almost immediately. The biological effects of radiation are cumulative and probabilistic. Radiation damages DNA. Most of the time, cellular repair mechanisms can fix this damage, but occasionally they fail or make mistakes. These mistakes can lead to mutations, which can lead to cancer. The more radiation exposure, the higher the probability of cancer. For short-duration missions, such as the Apollo flights, which lasted only a few days on the lunar surface, the radiation risk was acceptable, though still present. For permanent habitation, the risk becomes unacceptable. Over years of exposure, the probability of developing cancer approaches certainty. But cancer is a long-term effect. More immediate concerns include radiation sickness from acute high-dose exposures during solar events, damage to the central nervous system, which can cause cognitive impairment, and increased risk of cataracts. There is also growing evidence that radiation exposure increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, though the mechanisms are not yet fully understood. Shielding against radiation is possible, but it requires mass. The same principles that make Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field effective shields can be replicated artificially, but only at great cost. To shield against cosmic rays and solar radiation, you need dense material, lots of it, surrounding the habitat. Water is one of the best practical shielding materials. It is abundant, at least in principle, can be used for multiple purposes, and contains hydrogen, which is effective at absorbing high-energy particles. But you would need meters of water in all directions to provide adequate shielding, and water has mass. A cubic meter of water weighs 1,000 kilograms. A habitat large enough for a small crew, say 10 people, might have a livable volume of 500 cubic meters. To surround that volume with just 2 meters of water shielding on all sides would require thousands of cubic meters of water, millions of kilograms. Transporting that water from Earth is impossible with current rocket technology. It would require thousands of rocket launches, each carrying only a fraction of the needed mass. The alternative is to find and process water on the Moon, which we will return to, but that creates its own set of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Regolith, the lunar soil, can also provide shielding. It is dense, readily available, and can be piled on top of and around structures. But regolith is abrasive, filled with sharp particles created by micrometeorite impacts over billions of years. It is also electrostatic, clinging to everything it touches. Using regolith for radiation shielding means either burying habitats underground, which creates additional engineering challenges related to heat dissipation and structural stability, or developing autonomous systems that can move thousands of tons of regolith and pile it in precise configurations without human intervention. Both approaches are possible in principle, but both require infrastructure that does not yet exist and cannot be easily transported from Earth. This is the beginning of a pattern we will see repeatedly. Every solution to one problem on the Moon creates new problems that require yet more resources, more infrastructure, more supply missions from Earth. The radiation problem alone would make returning to Earth from an extended lunar stay medically complicated. A person who has received significant radiation exposure faces increased health risks for the rest of their lives. They would require ongoing medical monitoring and would be at elevated risk for multiple diseases. But radiation exposure is just one of many physiological changes that would occur during an extended lunar stay, and many of these changes would make the physical stress of a return journey dangerous or impossible. Consider the problem of returning to Earth from the Moon from a purely propulsive standpoint, setting aside for the moment all the biological and logistical challenges. The Apollo missions demonstrated that it is possible to launch from the lunar surface and return to Earth, but the conditions under which they did so are unlikely to ever be replicated. Each Apollo mission carried its own return vehicle, the Lunar Module Ascent Stage, which was specifically designed for a single purpose: to lift 2 astronauts from the lunar surface to lunar orbit, where they could rendezvous with the command module waiting above. This ascent stage had a single engine, no redundancy, and carried just enough fuel to reach orbit. It was left in lunar orbit after the rendezvous, eventually crashing back to the Moon or being ejected into solar orbit. The system worked, but it was minimal, and it depended on perfect execution. To launch from the Moon, you need velocity. Specifically, you need to reach lunar orbital velocity, which is approximately 1,680 meters per second at a typical low orbit altitude. This is significantly lower than Earth's orbital velocity of approximately 7,800 meters per second, and the difference is often cited as evidence that leaving the Moon is easier than leaving Earth. In one sense, this is true. The Moon's lower gravity, 1/6 that of Earth, and its lack of atmosphere mean that a lunar ascent vehicle does not need to be as powerful or carry as much fuel relative to its payload as an Earth launch vehicle. But this is only part of the picture. Reaching lunar orbit is not the same as returning to Earth. Once in lunar orbit, you still need to perform a trans-Earth injection burn, accelerating to approximately 2,500 meters per second relative to the Moon to escape its gravitational influence and enter a trajectory that will intercept Earth. This additional velocity requirement means that the total delta V, the change in velocity needed to go from the lunar surface to Earth intercept, is approximately 4,200 meters per second. Achieving this delta V requires fuel, and the amount of fuel required grows exponentially with the desired velocity change due to the rocket equation we discussed earlier. The Apollo lunar module ascent stage had a dry mass of approximately 2,200 kilograms and carried about 2,400 kilograms of propellant. This was enough to reach lunar orbit, but not enough to return to Earth. The return to Earth was performed by the Command and Service Module, which had been waiting in lunar orbit and which had its own fuel supply. This multi-stage approach is efficient, but it requires that all the components be delivered to the Moon ahead of time, either on the same mission or on previous missions. For a permanent lunar base, this means that any return vehicle must either be present from the beginning, which adds to the initial mass that must be delivered to the Moon, or must be sent on a dedicated supply mission, which is expensive and requires long-term planning. But here is where the problem becomes truly intractable. Fuel has a shelf life. Chemical rocket propellants degrade over time. Hypergolic propellants, which ignite on contact with each other and were used by Apollo, are stable for years but still require careful storage and periodic maintenance. Cryogenic propellants, such as liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which are more efficient, boil off continuously and cannot be stored for long periods without active refrigeration. A return vehicle stored on the lunar surface for months or years would require constant maintenance to ensure its fuel remained viable. This maintenance requires spare parts, skilled personnel, and energy, all of which must be supplied from Earth or manufactured on the Moon. The longer the return vehicle sits unused, the higher the probability of a critical failure. Seals dry out, valves stick, electronics degrade from radiation exposure. A vehicle that was functional when it arrived might not be functional years later when it is needed. There is also the question of where the fuel comes from. For the Apollo missions, all propellant was brought from Earth. Each mission carried exactly enough fuel to complete its objectives with a small margin for contingencies. For a permanent base, bringing all fuel from Earth is not sustainable. The mass's penalty is too high. This has led to proposals for producing fuel on the Moon using local resources, a process known as in situ resource utilization. Water ice has been detected in permanently shadowed craters near the lunar poles. In principle, this water could be mined, electrolyzed to separate hydrogen and oxygen, and then liquefied and used as rocket propellant. This sounds straightforward, but the engineering challenges are immense. Mining ice in permanently shadowed regions means working in near absolute darkness at temperatures below -200 Celsius. The ice is mixed with regolith and may exist only in low concentrations. Extracting, purifying, and processing it would require mining equipment, power generation, electrolysis units, liquefaction and storage facilities, and a workforce to operate and maintain all of this infrastructure. Each of these components must either be transported from Earth or manufactured on the Moon, and manufacturing them on the Moon requires even more infrastructure. This creates a circular dependency that is difficult to break. You need fuel to return to Earth. To produce fuel, you need infrastructure. To build infrastructure, you need supplies and personnel from Earth. To send supplies and personnel from Earth, you need fuel and launch vehicles. To justify the cost of ongoing supply missions, you need a reason to maintain the base. The reason for the base was presumably to establish a permanent human presence, to conduct research, perhaps to extract valuable resources. But if the base is barely self-sufficient, consuming all its resources just to survive, it produces no value that would justify its continued support. This is the infrastructure paradox, and it applies to far more than just fuel production. Every human on the Moon requires life support. They need air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, and a stable temperature environment. They need waste management systems, radiation shielding, power generation, and communication with Earth. They need medical care, tools, spare parts, and entertainment to maintain psychological health. On Earth, much of this is provided by the biosphere. Plants produce oxygen and food. The water cycle provides fresh water. Gravity settles dust and fluids. Temperature is moderated by the atmosphere. On the Moon, all of these functions must be replicated artificially, and artificial systems require energy, maintenance, and eventual replacement. Consider the oxygen supply. An average adult consumes approximately 840 litres of oxygen per day. This oxygen must be continuously replenished. On the International Space Station, oxygen is supplied through a combination of methods. Some is brought up from Earth in pressurized tanks. Some is produced by electrolysis of water, breaking H2O molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen is either vented to space or combined with carbon dioxide to produce water, closing the loop. This system works, but it requires energy, pure water, and regular maintenance. The electrolysis units have a limited operational lifetime and must be replaced periodically. For a lunar base, oxygen could theoretically be extracted from lunar regolith, which is approximately 40% oxygen by weight bound in mineral compounds. But extracting that oxygen requires heating the regolith to extremely high temperatures, around 2000 Celsius, or using chemical processes that require reagents that must be brought from Earth or synthesized on the Moon. Either approach requires significant energy and industrial infrastructure. Water is even more challenging. Humans need approximately 3 to 4 litres of water per day for drinking. Additional water is needed for hygiene, cooling systems, radiation shielding, and food preparation. Recycling water is essential. The ISS recycles approximately 93% of all water, including urine, sweat, and humidity from the air. This is an impressive efficiency, but it is not perfect. The remaining 7% must be resupplied from Earth. For a lunar base, that 7% loss rate means a continuous need for water resupply unless local water sources can be accessed and processed. As mentioned, water ice exists at the lunar poles, but extracting it, purifying it, and transporting it to a base that might not be located near the poles is a massive undertaking. Water is heavy. Moving large quantities of water across the lunar surface requires vehicles, energy, and infrastructure. food presents perhaps the most difficult challenge. Humans need approximately 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, depending on activity level. They also need a balanced diet containing proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. Food suitable for space storage must have a long shelf life, minimal preparation requirements, and acceptable taste and texture. On the ISS, food is resupplied regularly with fresh fruit and vegetables, arriving on each cargo mission and being consumed quickly. Dried, freeze-dried, and thermostabilized foods make up the bulk of the diet. These foods are nutritionally complete but monotonous, and the psychological impact of eating the same limited selection of meals repeatedly for years cannot be understated. Growing food on the moon has been proposed as a solution, but it is far more complex than simply planting seeds. Plants need light, which on the moon must be provided artificially during the lunar night. They need water, nutrients, carbon dioxide, and the right temperature and humidity. They need to be protected from radiation. Most critically, they need soil or a growth medium, and while lunar regolith could potentially be used, it is toxic to most plants in its raw form due to the presence of perchlораtes and other compounds. It would need to be processed, washed, and amended with organic material that would itself need to be brought from Earth or produced through composting of organic waste, which is minimal in a space environment. Establishing a functional greenhouse on the moon would require extensive infrastructure, constant monitoring, and significant research into how plants grow in low gravity and high radiation environments. All of these life support systems require power. The moon receives sunlight for 14 days at a time, followed by 14 days of darkness. Solar panels can provide power during the lunar day, but they are useless during the lunar night unless enormous battery systems are in place to store energy. Alternatively, a base could be located at one of the lunar poles, where certain elevated regions receive near-continuous sunlight due to the moon's minimal axial tilt. But these locations are limited and may not be ideal for other reasons, such as terrain or access to resources. Nuclear power is the most realistic option for continuous power generation on the moon. Small modular nuclear reactors can provide steady power regardless of the day-night cycle, but they are complex, expensive, require shielding, and must be maintained by specialists. They also have a limited operational lifetime, typically measured in years or decades, after which they must be replaced or refueled. Bringing nuclear fuel to the moon, maintaining nuclear reactors in a hostile environment, and eventually disposing of radioactive waste are all challenges that add to the overall burden of maintaining a lunar presence. The supply chain required to support a permanent lunar base is staggering in its complexity and cost. Every item needed on the moon must be manufactured on Earth, packaged for space travel, loaded onto a rocket, launched into space, transferred to a lunar lander, landed on the moon, and unpacked and installed. Each step has a failure rate. Rockets fail, landers crash, equipment breaks during transit. The supply chain from Earth to the moon is measured in months. Planning a resupply mission takes months of preparation. The launch itself is subject to weather constraints, technical delays, and orbital mechanics. Once launched, the spacecraft takes several days to reach the moon. If a critical component fails on the moon, the replacement part might not arrive for 6 months, assuming it is even identified and included on the next scheduled resupply mission. This long supply chain eliminates any possibility of just-in-time logistics. Everything must be planned far in advance, and large stockpiles of spare parts, consumables, and redundant systems must be maintained on the moon, all of which adds to the mass that must be delivered and the storage space that must be maintained. The cost of this supply chain is prohibitive. Current estimates for launching cargo to the moon vary depending on the launch system, but even optimistic figures suggest costs of tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram. A single person on the moon might require several tons of supplies per year for food, water, oxygen, spare parts, and other consumables. Multiply that by a crew of 10 or 20 people, and the annual resupply cost could reach into the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. This is sustainable only if there is a compelling economic or scientific justification, and at present, no such justification exists. The moon has resources, certainly. It has water ice, which we have discussed. It has helium-3, a rare isotope that has been proposed as a potential fuel for fusion reactors, though fusion power remains experimental and may never be economically viable. It has rare earth elements in its regolith, but extracting and refining these at the concentrations present would require industrial-scale mining and processing equipment. The moon also offers a platform for scientific research and astronomy, with its far side shielded from Earth's radio noise and its lack of atmosphere enabling clear observations. But none of these benefits at present justify the cost of permanent human habitation when robotic missions could accomplish many of the same goals at a fraction of the cost. This brings us to one of the most underappreciated challenges of long-duration space habitation: the psychological and neurological effects of isolation and confinement. Humans are social creatures who evolved in rich, dynamic environments. We are surrounded by sensory input constantly. We see a wide range of colours, textures, and movements. We hear complex soundscapes from rustling leaves to distant traffic. We smell the air, feel the wind, experience the variations of weather and season. On the moon, almost all of this sensory richness is absent. The environment is monochromatic, various shades of grey regolith under black sky. There is no wind, no weather, no sound except what is artificially generated inside the habitat. The horizon is closer due to the moon's smaller radius, creating a claustrophobic sense of enclosure. The view never changes. Day after day, the same regolith, the same shadows, the same harsh light and absolute darkness. Earth hangs in the sky, a blue marble that rotates slowly, a reminder of everything the crew has left behind. For some, this might be awe-inspiring. For others, it could become a source of profound longing or depression. The psychological effects of isolation are well documented from studies of Antarctic research stations, long-duration submarines, and the ISS. Crew members experience a range of issues including depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflict, sleep disturbances, and cognitive decline. These effects are mitigated on Earth-based stations by the knowledge that the isolation is temporary and that evacuation is possible if necessary. On the ISS, crew members can see Earth below them, a tangible connection to home. They can speak with family and friends in real time with minimal delay. They rotate back to Earth every 6 months. On the moon, the isolation is more profound. Communication with Earth has a delay of approximately 1.3 seconds each way due to the speed of light. This is not much, but it is enough to make real-time conversation feel slightly off, a constant reminder of the distance. Video calls with family become interviews rather than conversations. The crew would be more isolated than any humans in history, and unlike Antarctic researchers or ISS astronauts, they would know that their stay is indefinite, potentially permanent. Sensory deprivation can lead to hallucinations and cognitive dysfunction. The brain, deprived of external stimuli, begins to generate its own. Crew members might see things that are not there, hear sounds in the silence, feel phantom sensations. These effects can be mitigated with careful habitat design, providing varied lighting, colours, textures, and sounds. Virtual reality could offer simulated experiences of natural environments, but these are artificial substitutes for the real thing, and their effectiveness is limited. Over years, the psychological strain would mount. Interpersonal conflicts, inevitable in any small group confined together, would have no outlet. There is no leaving the base for a walk to clear your head, no going to visit friends elsewhere, no change of scenery. The crew must live and work together in close quarters, seeing the same faces, eating the same food, following the same routines, day after day, with no variation and no end in sight. Sleep is another casualty of the lunar environment. Humans evolved with a 24-hour circadian rhythm tied to the day-night cycle of Earth. The lunar day-night cycle is approximately 29.5 Earth days long. While habitats could maintain artificial lighting on a 24-hour schedule, the disconnect between interior lighting and the actual external light conditions could disrupt circadian rhythms. On the ISS, this is a known problem. Astronauts experience frequent sleep disturbances, partly due to the unusual light cycle. The space station orbits Earth 16 times per day, experiencing 16 sunrises and sunsets, and partly due to stress, noise, and the physical discomfort of sleeping in microgravity. On the Moon, the gravitational environment is different, 1/6 Earth's gravity, but the sleep disruptions would remain, compounded by the knowledge that outside it might be the middle of the lunar day with searing temperatures and blinding light, or the middle of the lunar night with absolute darkness and life-threatening cold. This cognitive dissonance between interior and exterior environments could make restful sleep difficult. The effects of low gravity on the human body are profound and, for long-duration exposure, potentially irreversible. We have extensive data from astronauts on the ISS, which operates in microgravity, but less data on the specific effects of lunar gravity, which is 1/6 of Earth's. Extrapolating from microgravity studies, we can predict several serious issues. Bones lose density in low gravity. Without the constant mechanical stress of supporting the body's weight against gravity, bones demineralize. This is not a minor effect. Astronauts on the ISS lose bone density at a rate of 1 to 2% per month. After 6 months, bone density in weight-bearing bones such as the hips and spine can decrease by 10 to 20%. This is equivalent to decades of osteoporosis. On the Moon, with 1/6 gravity providing some mechanical loading, the rate of bone loss would likely be slower than in microgravity, but still significant. Over years, this bone loss could become severe enough that the skeleton could not support the body's weight in Earth gravity. Fractures would become likely upon return to Earth. Vertebral compression fractures could occur simply from standing up. Muscle atrophy is another concern. Muscles, like bones, respond to mechanical load. In low gravity, muscles do not need to work as hard to move the body or lift objects. As a result, they atrophy, losing mass and strength. Astronauts on the ISS exercise for approximately 2 hours per day on specialized equipment to counteract this atrophy. But even with rigorous exercise programs, muscle loss occurs. The heart, a muscle itself, also weakens in low gravity. It does not need to pump as hard to circulate blood against a reduced gravitational gradient. The cardiovascular system deconditioning is one of the reasons astronauts feel faint when they first return to Earth. Their hearts are no longer conditioned to pump blood efficiently in Earth gravity. For someone living on the Moon for years, this deconditioning would be severe. A return to Earth would subject the body to stresses it is no longer equipped to handle. Fluid distribution in the body changes in low gravity. On Earth, gravity pulls fluids toward the lower body. In low gravity, fluids shift toward the head and upper body. This causes facial puffiness and increased intracranial pressure. Some astronauts develop vision problems. Due to this increased pressure, which can deform the eye and change its optics, a condition known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. The long-term effects of this condition are not fully understood, but they could include permanent vision changes. On the Moon, with 1/6 gravity, fluid shifts would still occur, though perhaps less severely than in microgravity. But over years, the cumulative effects could be significant. The immune system is also affected by space environments. Studies on ISS astronauts have shown that immune function is suppressed, making the body more susceptible to infections. Viruses that normally remain dormant in the body, such as herpes viruses, can reactivate. Wounds heal more slowly. The mechanisms behind these immune changes are not fully understood, but they involve stress, radiation exposure, and changes in gene expression. On the Moon, with its high radiation environment and confined living conditions that promote the spread of pathogens, immune suppression could be a serious problem. A simple infection that would be minor on Earth could become life-threatening on the Moon if medical resources are limited and evacuation is not possible. DNA, damage from radiation exposure, as we discussed earlier, accumulates over time and increases cancer risk, but radiation also has more immediate effects on cellular function. Cells exposed to radiation can undergo premature senescence, essentially aging faster. This cellular aging could manifest as accelerated aging of the entire organism. Someone living on the Moon for a decade might experience physiological aging equivalent to 2 or 3 decades on Earth. Their body would be older, weaker, and less capable of withstanding the stresses of a return journey. All of these physiological changes are interconnected and self-reinforcing. Bone loss and muscle atrophy reduce physical capacity. Immune suppression increases infection risk. Cardiovascular deconditioning reduces exercise tolerance, which makes it harder to maintain muscle and bone through exercise. Radiation damage and accelerated aging affect all systems of the body. After years on the Moon, a person's body would be fundamentally changed, adapted to low gravity and high radiation, and maladapted to Earth. The journey back to Earth, which requires spending days in a cramped spacecraft, enduring the high G-forces of re-entry and landing, and then readjusting to Earth's full gravity, would be physically traumatic. For some, it might not be survivable. For others, the readjustment period could take months or years, during which they would be largely incapacitated. The question then becomes, is return worth the risk? There is another, more subtle constraint that makes returning from the Moon difficult: the tyranny of orbital mechanics. Orbital mechanics, the physics of how objects move under the influence of gravity, dictates when and how you can travel between celestial bodies. It is not simply a matter of pointing your spacecraft toward your destination and applying thrust. Trajectories must be carefully calculated to minimize fuel consumption, avoid collisions, and arrive at the right place at the right time. For travel between the Moon and Earth, there are optimal times to launch and optimal trajectories to follow. These are determined by the positions and velocities of the Earth and Moon in their orbits. A direct return trajectory from the Moon to Earth, known as a free return trajectory or a minimum energy transfer orbit, takes approximately 3 days. This trajectory is ballistic, meaning the spacecraft is essentially coasting for most of the journey, using its engines only for small course corrections. To enter such a trajectory, the spacecraft must perform a trans-Earth injection burn at the right time and with the right velocity. The timing of this burn is constrained by orbital mechanics. If you miss the optimal window, you can still return, but it might require more fuel or a longer journey time. For a pre-planned mission like Apollo, these windows were calculated in advance, and the mission was designed around them. For an emergency evacuation from a lunar base, this constraint could be fatal. Imagine a scenario where a crew member on the Moon suffers a medical emergency that requires treatment on Earth. Perhaps it is a burst appendix, a severe infection, or a radiation-induced cancer that needs surgery. Time is critical, but the next optimal launch window to Earth might not be for days or weeks. Even after launch, the journey takes 3 days minimum. By the time the patient reaches Earth, a week or more might have passed. For many medical emergencies, that delay is too long. This is fundamentally different from medical emergencies on the ISS, where a Soyuz capsule is always docked and can return crew to Earth within hours if necessary. On the Moon, there is no equivalent quick escape option. The re-entry itself is another challenge. When a Bill spacecraft returns to Earth from the Moon, it is travelling at approximately 11 kilometers per second when it hits Earth's atmosphere. This is faster than low Earth orbit re-entry speeds, which are approximately 7.8 kilometers per second. The higher speed means more kinetic energy must be dissipated, which translates to higher heating and higher G-forces during re-entry. The Apollo command modules were designed to withstand this, using a blunt heat shield that ablated, vaporizing layer by layer to carry away heat. The crew experienced peak G-forces of approximately 6 Gs during re-entry, which is significant but manageable for healthy individuals in good physical condition. However, for crew members who have spent years on the Moon and have weakened bones, muscles, and cardiovascular systems, 6 Gs might be intolerable. It could cause fractures, loss of consciousness, or cardiac events. The re-entry vehicle would need to be designed with this in mind, possibly using a shallower re-entry profile to reduce G-forces, but this would increase heating and might require more sophisticated heat shielding. Once on Earth, the returning crew would face a lengthy readjustment period. As mentioned, their bodies would be deconditioned, their bones weakened, their muscles atrophied. They would need physical therapy, possibly lasting months, to regain the ability to walk and function normally in Earth gravity. During this time, they would be at high risk for injuries. Falls could result in fractures. Cardiovascular events could occur. The medical care required would be intensive and expensive. Moreover, the crew would be at increased risk for cancer and other radiation-induced diseases for the rest of their lives. They would require ongoing monitoring and potentially treatment. In a sense, their return to Earth would not mark the end of their ordeal, but the beginning of a new phase of managing the long-term health consequences of their lunar stay. Beyond the physical challenges, there is also the question of whether a return vehicle would even be available and functional when needed. As discussed, a return vehicle on the Moon would require ongoing maintenance, fuel, and spare parts. If supply missions from Earth are delayed or cancelled due to budget constraints, political changes, or technical failures, the return vehicle might degrade beyond usability. History is full of examples of remote outposts being abandoned or cut off from support. Antarctic bases have been closed. Military outposts have been left behind. The ISS itself has a planned end of life, after which it will be deorbited and destroyed. A lunar base could easily suffer the same fate. If support from Earth ceases for whatever reason, the crew on the Moon would have no way home. They would be stranded, left to survive as long as their remaining supplies and life support systems allow. This brings us to the question of rescue. If something goes catastrophically wrong on the Moon, is rescue possible? The answer is, in most scenarios, no. A rescue mission to the Moon would require launching a fully fueled spacecraft, transporting it to the Moon, landing near the affected base, loading the crew, and returning to Earth. This is essentially a full crewed lunar mission, which takes months to plan and execute under normal circumstances. In an emergency, with planning time compressed, the risks multiply. Rescue missions are difficult enough on Earth, where distances are short and infrastructure is abundant. In space, they are orders of magnitude harder. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster in 2003 killed 7 astronauts during re-entry. Could they have been rescued? NASA analyzed the possibility and concluded that a rescue mission using the shuttle Atlantis might have been possible, but it would have required heroic efforts, luck, and would have put another crew at significant risk. The rescue was never attempted, and Columbia's crew was lost. A rescue mission to the Moon would be far more complex than rescuing astronauts in low Earth orbit. The distances are greater, the logistics more challenging, and the time required longer. By the time a rescue mission could be mounted, the crew on the Moon might already be dead. The Apollo missions provide an instructive comparison. Apollo was humanity's only sustained effort to send humans to the Moon, and it succeeded spectacularly 6 times. But Apollo was not permanent habitation. The longest stay on the lunar surface was approximately 75 hours during Apollo 17. The entire Apollo program, from Apollo 11 in 1969 to Apollo 17 in 1972, lasted only 3.5 years. During that time, 12 men walked on the Moon, and all returned safely to Earth. But the conditions under which they returned were unique and unrepeatable. Each Apollo mission was meticulously planned. The Saturn V rocket, the most powerful ever built, was operational and had multiple units available. The industrial and political will to support the program was immense, driven by Cold War competition. The crews were test pilots and astronauts, highly trained and in peak physical condition. The missions were short, measured in days, not years, so the physiological effects of low gravity and radiation were minimal. Most importantly, the return vehicle was carried to the Moon on the same mission, ensuring it was fresh, fueled, and functional. Contrast this with a permanent lunar base. The crew would be living on the Moon for years, experiencing cumulative physiological degradation. The return vehicle, if one exists, would be stored on the lunar surface, subject to temperature extremes, radiation, and micrometeorite impacts. Maintenance would be performed by the crew themselves, who might not be rocket engineers. Spare parts would be limited to what was brought on previous supply missions. The political and financial support for the base would likely wax and wane over time as priorities shift and budgets tighten. There is no Cold War urgency driving continuous investment. When the time came to return, the vehicle might not work. The crew might not be physically capable of enduring the journey. And even if both the vehicle and the crew were functional, the cost and complexity of the return mission would be immense, requiring a level of support that might no longer exist. The infrastructure paradox is the final, insurmountable obstacle. To survive on the Moon permanently, you need a city-scale infrastructure. You need power plants, water processing facilities, oxygen generation systems, greenhouses, medical facilities, manufacturing capabilities, and comfortable living spaces. You need this infrastructure not just to thrive, but to survive. Without it, the base is a precarious toehold, vulnerable to any single point failure. But to build this infrastructure, you need the ability to survive while building it. You need supplies, equipment, and personnel from Earth delivered continuously over years or decades. Each delivery mission costs hundreds of millions of dollars and carries the risk of failure. The infrastructure cannot be built all at once. It must be assembled piece by piece, with each piece requiring previous pieces to already be functional. Power generation is needed to produce oxygen. Oxygen is needed to keep the crew alive while they build water processing. Water processing is needed to provide water for the crew and for food production. Food production requires water, power, and a habitable greenhouse. Every system depends on every other system, and none can fail without jeopardizing everything. This is the paradox. You need a self-sufficient city to ensure the crew can survive indefinitely and have the resources to build and maintain a return vehicle. But you need to survive and be supplied from Earth long enough to build that city. And during the decades it would take to reach self-sufficiency, the base would be completely dependent on Earth for support. Any disruption, political turmoil, economic collapse, loss of public interest, change in administration priorities, or even a series of failed supply missions could doom the base. And unlike orbital stations, which can be abandoned and the crew return to Earth within hours or days, abandoning a lunar base means the crew must have a functional return vehicle ready and must be physically capable of surviving the return journey. If either condition is not met, abandonment means death. The first humans to live permanently on the Moon will face all of these challenges simultaneously. They will live in a hostile environment with no margin for error. They will be dependent on fragile supply chains stretched across hundreds of thousands of kilometers. They will experience cumulative physiological damage that makes a return to Earth increasingly difficult and eventually impossible. They will be psychologically isolated, living in a monotonous, sensory-deprived environment with limited contact with the rest of humanity. They will know that rescue is unlikely, that their return vehicle, if it exists, might not function when needed, and that the support from Earth they depend on could be withdrawn at any time for reasons beyond their control. They will in essence be exiles, pioneers of a new world, but pioneers who can never come home. This is not a failure of imagination or ambition. It is a recognition of physical reality. The Moon is not a place for human life. It is a dead rock, beautiful from a distance, but lethal up close. We can visit it, as we did during Apollo. We can send robots to study it, to extract its resources, to prepare the way for future human missions. But to live there permanently, to commit humans to an indefinite stay on the lunar surface, is to send them on a one-way journey. Not because we lack the technology to bring them back, but because the interconnected challenges of radiation, low gravity, isolation, supply logistics, and infrastructure dependency create a web from which escape becomes progressively less likely as time passes. The first generation of lunar settlers will not return to Earth because they cannot, because their bodies will no longer tolerate Earth's gravity, because their return vehicle will no longer be viable, because the support infrastructure required for their return will no longer exist, or because the Earth they left behind will have moved on, focusing its resources and attention on other priorities and leaving the Moon behind as a reminder of the limits of human ambition in the face of cosmic indifference. They will live out their lives on the Moon, adapt as best they can, and perhaps create a new branch of humanity, one shaped by the harsh realities of life in 1/6 gravity under constant radiation, forever separated from the world of their birth by a gulf that is as much physiological and logistical as it is spatial. The Moon may one day host permanent human presence, but that presence will be defined not by triumphant returns and tales of adventure, but by quiet resignation, endurance, and the slow, irreversible transformation of human beings into something that can survive in that environment, at the cost of ever being able to return to the world from which they came.